in the past couple of months, we've really seen governments crafting their own AI policies, of course, rooted in their own histories and their own perspectives. And I truly believe that digital sovereignty is very legitimate and necessary, but at the same time, there's a second truth, and that's the fact that AI often does not observe borders. So today, I think the conversation we want to have is not about homogenizing governance or arguing for which model is the best, but our real task here for the panel is to look at identifying where approaches diverge, where they converge, and where coordination is necessary because the issues at hand are really cross-border and require some type of coordination. So I'm very privileged to have 5 remarkable panelists here with me. I will quickly introduce them and we'll jump right into it because I took a long time in the last session. First, starting all the way from our left, we have Mr. Juha Heikkilä. He's the advisor at the AI office at the European Commission. Welcome. And then we have Alexander Brazil de Silva, the deputy head of minister at the Brazilian embassy in London. Next to Mr. Alexander, we have Nathan Calvin, who's the general counsel at Encode AI, joining us from the US. And Ms. Rebecca Finley, the CEO of Partnership on AI. Hi, Rebecca. And next to me, of course, we have Audrey Plonk, the Deputy Director of the OECD Directorate for Science, Technology, and Innovation. Okay, let's jump straight into it. Juha, the first question I have is for you. So Europe, notably through the AI Act and its code of practice for GPay, offers what we can think about as a distinctive model when it comes to governing general purpose AI. So my question to you is, how do you see this approach fitting within emerging global narratives that often emphasize things like speed and competition and strategic advantage?
So, a false start, let's get started. So, first of all, the AI Act, of course, is designed to be proportionate. So, it has of course, the risk-based approach to AI systems. And this means that it intervenes where it is necessary, where the risk is either high or unacceptable, putting requirements on in the first case, but imposing also a prohibition in the second case for a handful of cases where we think that the use are so harmful or not in line with our values that they cannot be admitted in the European Union. But then, of course, we have specific provisions for what we call general purpose AI models in the AI Act. Think of generative AI, of course, mainly transparency obligations, and then harder requirements in those cases where these powerful models are considered to pose a systemic risk. Looking at the question, we can look at it from different angles. So, first of all, the AI Act sets uniform guardrails across the European Union, across the member states. This provides legal certainty and a known operating environment, of course, for developers, providers of AI. This can, of course, be considered to be an advantage. One thing that often gets ignored and doesn't get mentioned at all is that it is not the case that there would be no legislation in the European Union if we didn't have the AI Act. So it is obvious that the member states would have proceeded to legislate one way or another. So in this sense, we have uniform rules across the Union. We have prevented the fragmentation, which we think is actually quite important. Fragmentation on the one hand of the legal landscape, but also on the other hand of the single market. This, by the way, is quite different from the situation in countries like the United States, where there is a patchwork of legislation emerging, which the current government, of course, is trying to prevent. But because the AI Act doesn't actually regulate technology as such, but certain uses of it, it does actually also leave scope for innovation. As for then the general purpose AI models, the code of practice was developed as a tool to actually support compliance, to reduce administrative burden. So in the development of the code of practice, which was done, by the way, with support from the stakeholders, so we had a lot of stakeholder input for this process, the idea was to take on board, when appropriate, existing industry practice so that we don't create a parallel set of rules. Of course, the AI Act provisions on general purpose AI, they apply in any case. So even those who do not want to sign up to the code of practice, they will still have to comply with the provisions on general purpose AI in the AI Act, one way or another. But this is meant to simplify compliance. I would also like to highlight the fact that we should really look at the full picture. So it is not often talked about. The media tends to prefer to present things in a more black and white fashion and not in a nuanced fashion. But we do actually do much more than regulation in the European Union. So we have adopted, I mean, over the years we supported a lot of research and innovation, but we have recently also adopted a package of measures which support capacity building on the one hand, but also adoption. So the so-called AI Content Action Plan in the spring was adopted with particular focus on strengthening our computational capacity. So it talks about setting up the AI factories. So these are ecosystems built around our supercomputers. We have an existing network of supercomputers. 19 of these AI factories will be built up, or being built up. Some of them are already in operation, most of them in fact. And then we will boost further the computation capacity with 4 to 5 gigafactories. It also looks at improving skills, for example. And then the Apply AI strategy that we adopted just in October focuses on boosting adoption, strengthening key industries, strategic industries, 10 strategic industries, and the public sector, where we think it's particularly important in the European Union to support the adoption of AI. But all these measures go hand in hand because we need trust to have adoption, and we need to have adoption to have the benefits of AI. So that's in a nutshell how we see it.
Thank you for that, and I agree on the point on trust. I think that's central within all these conversations. If we go across the Atlantic, Alexander, and we can speak a little bit about Brazil. My understanding is that Brazil is refining its own AI bill at this crucial moment. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how Brazil is prioritizing governance, especially when it comes to frontier AI or general purpose AI.
We need to understand when you think about the Brazilian way of doing things in the internet that we have never been shy of making an attempt of regulating the internet for the benefit of all. We have been regulating things since 2014 when we have our first framework for internet. We have been doing things in the data governance in 2018, and we just recently have a very comprehensive law regarding the protection of children and teenagers online that creates very strong set of framework for avoiding the kind of abuse that you can see in several tools and several platforms for the children. Regarding AI, it says, as everywhere, work in progress. That is very similar to what's happening here in the UK, a debate between the content creators. As you know, Brazil is a powerful cultural creator. We have lots of products that we need to protect. At the same time, a very strong artistic community that's intent on avoiding the use of their work. And at the same time, you have a very thriving and upcoming startup community, people that are dealing and they're working with the new technologies. So it's a matter of finding a balance. We, as any former colonial country that was colonized, we have very keen intent to avoid any kind of new colonialism and the kind of extraction economy that we suffer, as so many other countries that suffer under colonialism in the past. We don't want that kind of a structure to be replaced. At the same time, you have to also acknowledge that we need to have access and need to have a better understanding and a domestic industry with the new technology. So it's a hard balance to achieve. The discussion is going on. We had the AI bill is in the Congress right now. There is a democratic process going on. I was talking yesterday about it. People are saying, no, we're concerned about watering down the law, and there was all this thing, all this discussion about this idea that the law is going to be watered down in the Congress. And what I say is, what's important is that a law is approved through the democratic process. A democratic process must listen to every voice. And there is no better place than an elected Congress to do so. It's better to have a weaker law that we approve in the Congress that will be accepted by the whole of society instead of a regulation that's going to be top down and will not be accepted by the society. So I probably the law that will be approved in our Congress will not be the law that I would like to see. I think that's a good thing because I'm not a dictator and I have no, no talent to be so. The important part is that will be a law that will be approved in the democratic process. And I think that in this moment right now, in every discussion, we have to be very clear about the democracy and the rules of democracy must be attempted. And that goes from our ideas of what AI should be to the company's ideas of AI should be, and that must be regulated with a view of all the voices in society. So that's basically what I would like to say about AI. I will not go into detail because, as I said, it's a work in progress and things are changing as we speak.
I very much appreciate that. A quick follow-up question before we move forward. I'm sorry, Anush. So I know Brazil is demonstrating growing leadership in the BRICS and also has shown its commitment to South diplomacy. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you see Brazil shaping AI norms, especially amongst the more developing and now or recently industrialized countries.
Of course, thank you very much. It's a very important question. As you know, Brazil had the trifecta of presidencies in the last 2 years that made me very busy here in London. We had the G20, we had the BRICS, and then we have the COP30 presidency that's ending now. And in all of them, one of the aspects that we want to include is the dimension of technology, and that goes deeper in the general principles of what the Brazilian government believes should inform the multilateral process. We had to pay attention to the principles of inclusion, to the principles of reduction of poverty, to the principle of reduction of inequality. We have to combat, as I said before, the kind of a cultural and technological extractivism that's happening again and against the global south. And so what we have been doing during the G20, and I'm going to read a little bit because it's better to say things a little bit more with more substance here. Well, the G20 presidents try to change a little bit the narrative. If you think about what the G7 was talking about and about AI, we actually try to focus more on the inequality reduction and less on the kind of existential risk and safety concerns that were very much in place at that time. We want to have very much emphasis on the idea of digital literacy and to have meaningful connectivity, also with a view of preserving and improving the quality of life and preserving jobs, especially in low-skill parts of the population that are the majority still in most of our global south countries. And we started the global initiative for information target and climate change that has an AI aspect, since the climate change denial is powered by AI, as we know. The BRICS presidency is a different set of countries, it's a different set of concerns, of course. It was more explicitly asserted the right to development AI. The definition of the states has a right to control its data and its infrastructure and its regulatory framework. That's important that every country must be allowed to do so. And to reject any kind of extraterritorial imposition of foreign rules. And the idea that we need to reduce our dependence on external models and to have more domestic developments. We encourage the development of sovereign clouds and the creation of open foundational models, and the idea that we need to develop and invest in the creation of non-English foundational models, because we have to combat there is a lot of languages that are not well represented in the actual environment. And to go in the third one, we have to go to COP30. Of course, AI was not the basic, more important part that we are dealing in COP30, because there was another real existential risks in the climate change that we'd have to deal there. But we have been trying to give strength to the idea of the information integrity on climate change as a very important thing to do, because what we have to combat now is not only the climate change, but also climate change denialism, and that's been enforced by the internet and social media and now AI, and that's an important part of what we need to do if you want to combat the problem of climate change everywhere. Thank you.
And I just realized you guys said great, one question after the other. So my next question is for you, Nathan, turning to the United States. it feels many ways in the United States we're seeing two different approaches emerging. One on a federal level that I guess you can think about it as a narrative that's very much shaped by innovation and competition and even national security, as we're currently seeing through the Genesis plan, but also another one on a state level, as reflected by SB53 in California or the RAISE Act in New York, that focuses more on protections, especially when it comes to children, like we just discussed, or workers. So you've been directly involved in these efforts. My question to you is how you see these two approaches interacting in practice.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, one that I've been wrestling with a lot even this past week around some of the debates around the inclusion of broad preemption in the National Defense Authorization Act that would, prevent states from enacting these sorts of laws without, placing an equivalent federal standard nationally. I do think one thing I want to say is, I think sometimes the extent of the divergence or disagreement here is sometimes larger. That I think there's a mix. I think there is like very real disagreement, and I think I will talk about that. But I think sometimes there's, for example, the AI action plan, which one of the lead drafters of that was Dean Ball. He's spoken very positively about SB53 and has actually endorsed that as a potential framework for for federal rules. And I think that sort of thing where if you have the model that the states are moving in one direction and the federal government in a completely different direction. I think, not to say that his views are necessarily representative of the current White House, but I think there is genuine disagreement and back and forth, and I don't want to necessarily say what the federal and national approach will continue to be. I do think there is this outlook that is championed by kind of some of what views that David Sachs has said and some of the A16Z has said that really is a just very, I think they describe it as, let them cook, just kind of let industry do whatever it wants, and that will necessarily lead to the best outcomes, and that there is not really a role for, moving beyond voluntary agreements. And I do think that, I think the states are rejecting that. I think that view is going to become increasingly, unpopular and untenable, and I also, think that it's possible that we may see the federal government at some point also increasingly reject that view as well. I do think, another thing I will say as well is California passed SB 53 and also is the location where we are seeing a tremendous amount of this innovation, where we are seeing the leading companies. You're seeing companies also like Anthropic, which are in talks to do a $350 billion IPO, while they are at the same time investing a lot in safety and transparency practices, and they are seeing actually higher adoption in some cases with enterprises and large businesses that both care about and want to be implementing AI, but also care a lot about reliability and cybersecurity and understanding the safety of these products. And I also think we're going to see that. Another area around this issue of kid safety, where I think we are seeing, and I think other speakers have mentioned this, of a lot of actually agreement across a ton of different jurisdictions, and conservatives and liberals and all of these folks who are concerned about this. And I think companies are going to recognize that. I think the attitude of just letting them do whatever they want and having some of these systems, encouraging young people to commit suicide or, facilitating, really severe risks, that I don't think that that's in the long run interest of innovation or national security or these other things. And so anyway, I'm hoping that we see a greater amount of convergence. Obviously, I'm a fan of the approach that we've been laying out in things like the RAISE Act and SB 53. I think they are a way of advancing security and safety, while preserving innovation and national security, and I think in some ways actively furthering those things. I think currently there's a perspective winning out in parts of Congress and the White House that really is rejecting that and trying to move a different way. But I think the AI policy world changes very, very quickly, and I don't know that that's necessarily the direction that we, what the conversation will look like even within a year. So those are some of the thoughts there.
The last point is so true. I feel even every week, every month, we're witnessing a different world around us. My next question is for you, Audrey. So across OECD member states, we also see obviously a wide spectrum of different AI governance approaches, ranging maybe from the more risk management approaches, including regulatory, heavy regulation, but also more voluntary frameworks. So my question, Audrey, is from your vantage point at the OECD, how do you navigate and really balance these differences while still obviously supporting coherence when it's necessary?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I think, well, coherence is always necessary. So I think it's sort of the foundation of one of the things we're trying to accomplish as an organization. But look, I mean, I think we're fairly pragmatic, right? We have a wide variety of countries, but they're all market-driven democracies, and so they operate under the rule of law. You can like it, you can not like it, but it is what it is. And so it's not exactly our job today to litigate that with them, and it's our job to find solutions to help them work together, respecting their own legal and cultural structures. And I think there's lots of examples of how we've been successful at doing that over the course of the last 60 years across many domains in the OECD. With regard to AI specifically, I mean, I think to some degree some of these things are false dichotomies. Like everybody's taking a risk-based approach on some level. Like it's not, I don't see these as some are risk-based approaches, some are not risk-based approaches. There's risk-based approaches in legislation. There's risk-based approaches in voluntary mechanisms. That's sort of, we're kind of mixing apples and oranges. But I think just a couple concrete things we've done, and I know we're sort of late on the panel, but I think we're kind of a sleepy, boring organization in the 16th arrondissement of Paris that half of the world has never heard of. Sorry, Ambassador. It's not at all to at all minimize the importance of your post in Paris. But one of the things that we're well known for doing is writing definitions and writing down how things should be called and how we should categorize them and what organizational mechanisms we should use so that we can all say we're talking more or less about the same thing. And I think in the technology space broadly, that's been really hard for like a really long time. And we've managed to do that in a bunch of different domains at the OECD. And I think that is, as unsexy as sometimes it is, it's critically necessary. And so I think, yes, there's diverging approaches. Yes, there's quote unquote fragmentation. Yes, I think the industry is caught between a rock and a hard place in a lot of situations as we move to implement different regulations, just because the implementation of regulation is hard no matter what it is. It's just hard. You have to take something that's really high level and try to figure out how to take it and put it in a product. It's really hard. So I'm sure all the companies there will tell you it's hard. It takes work, it takes collaboration, it takes translating between what a broad principle is to like how are we going to code it in a thing, or what does risk management look like when you're dealing with these 25 different products across 50 different business sector and unit. This is work. This is not theoretical. So it's going to look different. It's going to be different. But when we're looking at the big picture and stepping back, we want to say, like, are we talking about the same things? Are we more or less measuring the same things? And can we agree on what we think AI is, what it isn't, what is generative AI? So we spend a lot of time doing that kind of thing, and I can give you a million of examples, but most of you probably already know them, so I won't bore you with repeating things that we've already said. And so yes, I think there is, we like to talk about fragmentation because it's something we worry about as policymakers, and it's important that we worry about it because we can't, our guiding principle is technology can be used for good, and we think it is a necessary advancement. Any societies that haven't, adopted railroads and don't have electricity, they're left behind. And so these are all movements toward progress, and progress is good. And, life expectancy going up. And okay, well, that's maybe a bad data point to use, but for a long time, life expectancy was going up, and maternal mortality rates were down, and so progress is good, and technology is a tool for progress, and so we want to use it as such, and so we have to govern it as such, and people are going to govern it differently, and not inherently one part is right or wrong, but our objective from our organization is to bring as many people together to talk about how to do it collectively so the maximum benefit can be gotten, and that can't be I guess maybe my personal plea, having been in this space for maybe too long, is like we spend a lot of time in the political space quibbling over whose system is better than whose, and who has more rights and who has less rights, and whose rights are better and whose systems are better and whose and we argue about that, and you'll never get out of that. What I think we need to do is spend the time talking about the technology like we're doing here, what's working and what's not working, what we're actually talking about, like specifically what we're talking about, and how it relates to things that are already in place. I think Juha said it well, that like if the AI Act hadn't come, the countries would have done their own thing, and so they've aligned certain things, and that's great. But also, I'm sorry, but the United States has a broad and proud history of having, no federal preemption in a whole bunch of different areas. So, we have data breach notification issues in the U.S. that have persisted for years. So I just don't think that that's as compelling as, what do we actually want the technology to look like beyond sort of the political narrative that it's really hard to get out of this beauty contest sort of situation. So, I guess in terms of the OECD, I think what we're trying to do is bring as many people to the table together to talk about maybe the less sexy parts of it, to align and write down hard technical things that are credible in that space, so that when we look at what's actually happening in the world, we're comparing as apples to apples, or at least, varietals of apples to varietals of apples, and we're sort of more or less saying the same thing. We may disagree on where to set the threshold across where the risk is. Countries will disagree about where the risk is. Countries will disagree on that, and that is true. But we should not talk about that disagreement, and we should not share information about it, and we should not have those debates, because that's the way that we learn from each other and get progress.
Thanks. No, I think that the framing that you provided to us is really productive. And I completely agree also that we need to be focusing on concrete opportunities for collaboration. I know you didn't want to go into examples, but for me, something that I'm really excited about is the OECD shared reporting framework for incident reporting. I find that as a really concrete opportunity for different states to get together.
You mean the incident monitor or the hype? See, these are different things. So I already talked about the incident monitor, but maybe you want to talk about the Hiroshima process.
Well, both. The
Okay.
reporting process for Hiroshima.
We should let Rebecca do that.
Yeah. Well, my next question is actually going to Rebecca. Rebecca, the Partnership on AI is part of mostly all the international dialogues, or all the key international dialogues happening around the world. So you have front row access, I think, to a lot of different conversations. I'm wondering, from the last couple of months, when you interact in different jurisdictions with different stakeholders, what opportunities you see for meaningful collaboration on the governance, especially of powerful AI systems.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I was thinking about this question of meaningful collaboration, frontier AI, and clearly the talks that we've heard this morning and the work that's going to happen this afternoon is an example of meaningful collaboration. So what is the challenge that I think we face, and I think we need to address in this moment as we work through this exercise and having the opportunity to be here amongst real policy makers? I think we need to be really clear about finding the signal and the noise, and I think that's in some ways, Audrey, is what you were calling about, and what the policy responses that we're hearing about this panel are trying to tell us, because there is a lot of noise, and you can see it in the diversity of perspectives and issues that have been raised this morning. And I am a hopeful and optimistic person, and I think we need to find those places where we can move the dial forward. And in that regard, I really subscribe to the belief that when it comes to hard law, when it comes to policy, we will be best fit for the future if we are making good policy today, and the foundations of our future success will rest on our capacity to deal with those harms that we are seeing in our communities today. And I think about Jason Furman, economist at Harvard, happened to be on the founding director of the Partnership on AI board, and he talks about this in terms of economic policy, right? It's very, very hard to predict the future, and I think when we look at frontier AI systems and advanced AI systems, it is very hard for us to predict them. And we can look at all of the examples in the past where we haven't done a very good job. Not only is it hard to predict the future, but it's really hard to predict what the right policies are going to be to respond to that future. Look at the challenges our policymakers are having today, whether it's what is happening with the EU AI Act and the evolution or iterations of that work, whether it's thinking about what's happening in the U.S. between the federal and the state and local government actions that are taking place. So that is in itself challenging. So to think that we can predict the future and then predict the correct policy response to that future, I think is not the signal we should be attending to in this moment. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing anything. In fact, that means we should be doing more and leaning more into what I think we all know about. This morning on the BBC News, when I woke up this morning, the first story was about the expansion of facial recognition by the police force, and the second story was about concerns around rise in mental health and the implications of social media and the platforms in that regard. So this is how AI is showing up in the lives of citizens and communities today. So questions of privacy, making sure that we are protecting children and child safety, making sure AI-enabled crimes and fraud and scams, those are all the issues that our policymakers need to be thinking about and attending to today, and we need to be supporting them as civil society advocates in doing that, and that's yet in the international domain, that shows up, of course, in our international human rights frameworks and the way in which jurisdictions are able to enforce those and come to the table to discuss those as an international community. So one, keep focused on today, the issues of today. That is the foundation for what we will do. Second point, do what many of us in this room do, which is lean into research, ensuring that we're building the state of AI safety science, ensuring that we're building the state of frameworks, definitions, trying to set those guardrails. And that means we have a particular challenge in the AI community because it's a lot of the focus that we at the Partnership on AI are working on. And that is the question of transparency, because so much of the research is happening behind closed doors. And so how are we as a communicating, advocating for data access, for transparency, for reporting, to have better understanding, as we heard on the panel this morning around the frontier of AI science, what is happening, the question of evaluations and measurements, how do we build independent, open, publicly available measurement and evaluation with all of the attendant challenges that we heard about this morning with regard to gaming. So I think that's a lot of the work that we are focused on at PAI. It's really fundamental, and it is incredibly important to the broader policy community, because it is setting those terms and those frameworks, doing some of that pre-negotiation and understanding across different sectors about what's needed. And then finally, of course, we need to lean into the institutions. I think it was Amandeep who mentioned, right? We have the new global dialogue that has been set up by the UN. We have the International Scientific Panel. We have the work of the G7 and the HAPE reporting that's taking place. We have now the new network of safety and security institutes. We have a thriving academic community. So I think the question for us is, as we think about that signal, how do we make sure those institutions are adaptive, are flexible, are being conscious of what is needed today, attending to what are the open questions about the future? And that's what gives me hope, because as we think about the conversation that's going to take place this afternoon, resting on the fundamental importance of the incident reporting work that's been done by the OECD and others, how do we think about those questions? And that's the challenge, I think, to all of us today. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you to my panelists. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you guys did as well. We can adjourn.